Hey guys, what's going on? It's Joshua Hall here, and I wanted to share my experience that I've been through over the last 4.5 years. It was a very traumatic thing in federal prison. It's a story that I think needs to be told to raise awareness about what's going on in our country's federal prisons and to advocate for some of the people that I had met in there. And I just think it's an all-around interesting story that people will find fascinating if you're bored. But it is an important societal issue as well happening in the United States today with mass incarceration, and I learned a lot through the process. So 4.5 years ago, June 8th of 2021, I had our home raided. The FBI came to our house, about 20 plus agents, assault weapons, pointed at my family and I. My brother was a teenager at the time. He wants to go into criminal justice. Now he's taking it in college. I think that kind of inspired him, ironically enough. But it was a very traumatic experience. The raid was over social media accounts I had been running of President Trump's family members that President Trump believed was actually his family. So basically, he put out a tweet thinking I was his sister on one of the parody accounts. And that obviously made it go viral, and they were able to link the accounts to me. I had my own personal name advertised on some of them and a GoFundMe that was linked to the accounts where I was receiving donations for what was supposed to be a political campaign. I ended up spending the money on myself. It was about $7,000. So it was definitely a lot of force used for a nonviolent allegation. A lot of that was happening in the country at the time. A lot of people got caught up in these kinds of cases. I had a serious alcohol addiction, and not to make any excuses, but that certainly did play a big factor in what happened there. Ended up basically being on pretrial. My drinking got much worse. I think the stress of everything, like with the feds prosecuting you, and it's kind of like a dark cloud hanging over you. You feel kind of like you're being cornered, and it's a lot. So that made my drinking worse. It was no longer just at night. It became an all-day, everyday thing. And I ended up basically getting sent to jail on pretrial. And it wasn't for a long time, but I kept messing up with public drunkennesses and getting myself in trouble with the drinking, not catching like any crimes or anything like that. Well, one of the times when I was out, I had made a drunk phone call because I felt so like cornered, and you feel like a caged animal, kind of just like desperate. And I made an intoxicated phone call to Congressman Swalwell of California's office when his number was being circulated on Twitter when I had been drunk. And it was a threatening call. I took it way too far. My comments, a lot of people were leaving messages for him, but they were more on like the, maybe on the PG-13 side. Mine was like a rated X. I mean, it was way too far what I said. And they ended up charging me with that as well, which is what really got me the jail time, because the fraud count, the value was so low for that. We're talking like $7,000, and your guidelines in the federal system, the way it works are, the less money, obviously, the lower your guidelines. So my guidelines for that were like, I think 6 to 12 months for the fraud. The threat count bumped it up to a total of 27 to 33. They have like a chart that they use, like a chart type of system. So basically, I ended up so the feds have a lot of leeway with sentencing, so they can go under the guidelines or over. Most of the time, if they do a variance, it's called an upward or downward departure from the guidelines, they tend to go lower more times than not. So I got 20 months in the Southern District of New York is where I was prosecuted. They were doing a lot of the political cases at the time. If you remember, Donald Trump, a lot of his supporters that were prosecuted for the white-collar types of things ended up in SDNY. They're like one of the biggest U.S. attorney's office in the United States. And basically, I think, if I remember correctly, he was civilly sued in that area as well, although I think his civil suits were state stuff. But anyway, so basically, what ends up happening, I get 20 months, right? And I had to go to Otisville, New York, which was a medium security federal prison near Pennsylvania. Is about 3 hours from where I live here in the Harrisburg area. And Otisville was definitely like an eye-opener because, you got to think, like, I've never been in prison or in that kind of situation before, and you just show up and they could smell that you're new right away. They could tell And when I say they smell it, they could see it from a mile away. It's like, it's pretty evident when someone hasn't been in prison. But I got lucky because I had people that looked out for me. See, prison, it never got with the times in terms of like integration of society. It's still very much segregated, and it's designed that way to keep people divided. So you can't move in. It's not correct for like a white person to move in with a black person. You can talk and associate with other races, but to move in, you got to live with your same race and you got to sit with your same race. So I had people that took me in with a white car. I didn't like it because I'm not a racist. I was never raised like that. I don't like the racial stuff. I think it's very toxic. And really, like, it's stupid. If anything, I think it's very stupid that people think like that, because like our DNA is like 99.9% similar. But anyway, it's just a skin pigmentation. I always thought that was a stupid theory about the race stuff. So basically, I ended up getting taken in. There was a guy, Alex Shevgert. He was a Russian mobster, and he really showed me the way. He looked out for me. He had been in the feds since 2007. I guess he had tried to like order a hit on his in-laws. He had been involved in some actual like murder, like some serious stuff. So basically, he took me under his wing, and he had a life sentence, by the way. And you know, I used to spend a lot of time in his cell, hanging out, and you know, we had a good relationship. I know, like, it sounds crazy because you think you get numb to that stuff. Like, you think like, oh, this guy's in for that. But if you've been there for a little bit, and those are the only people you're around. You're forced to be around them, right? So it's like you find a way to adapt to your environment and get along with people. And I'm a very good people person, so I was able, like, even the hardened people in there, like the gangster mobster type people, liked me because I never caused trouble. I never went into drug debt. That's the big thing, is people that go into debt with buying drugs and gambling debts is where you get yourself in trouble. But like, since they knew I wasn't, now I'm lucky I didn't go to a federal penitentiary, because those are like the real deal. Like, if you go to a pen, I mean, like, you're having to stab somebody or get stabbed, from what I have heard. The medium was not that intense. There was some violence, but most of the people in the medium, you got to think, were stepping down from penitentiaries and like kind of on their way to try to get home someday. Most of them. There was some older ones with life, but they don't want to do anything that's going to get them back into the penitentiary. So I was lucky in that regard, that like my physical safety in that place was never, you know, like a severe danger. Now, I did meet some good people in there. There's a guy, Chris Cornett, and I became close friends with him. I still talk to his mom, and to Chris, and I am trying to advocate for him. He got a 40-year sentence for a nonviolent white-collar offense, like a Ponzi scheme type of thing, around the time the Wall Street crash happened in '08, so they made an example out of Cornett. I used to call him Cornetto. He was from Texas. He had a deep Southern accent, so we had a great relationship, and he's 56. So I am trying to, I promised him before I left that I would use my platform on X and some of my connections, hopefully, because I've talked to Ed Martin, the pardon attorney, and I've talked to a guy named McCabe who works in the DOJ. So I want to lobby for Cornett now, because he does not deserve, he's done 16 years, he's been in since '09, he does not deserve a 40-year sentence. Regardless, he was $13 million, but you know, there's people now that are stealing, like Bankman-Fried took in the billions and got 25 years. So I really want to see Cornett get out. I think people like that deserve a second chance. They're not a physical threat to society, and he's really served his time. The First Step Back was supposed to kind of make things like that harder for them to do, because they used to stack, like if you had 2 counts, instead of 20 years running concurrent together, they were stacking them and making it 20 plus 20, which is what happened to him. And for whatever reason, certain offenses, the First Step Back didn't remedy that, whereas like the nonviolent drug stuff, it did. So he just kind of got a raw deal, and he put in a petition for clemency, which is another thing. I helped inmates a lot, put in clemency petitions. I helped inmates with legal motions, filing, and letters to the judge for their cases, because I was very good with the law. I learned the law really good. Not really so much state stuff, but federal law, I became kind of like, I wouldn't say a lawyer or an expert, but I understood the basics, and I could help people write briefs. Sometimes I would help with appeals. But that was difficult, because you have to really know the case law, and that sometimes took a lot of time to study on that law library. But I did learn a lot. I filed civil lawsuits I have one about ballot access right now in Pennsylvania. That's kind of what I do with my spare time. And see, like in prison, everybody has a hustle, right? So let's say I'm good with the law. People will come to you looking for a favor from you, and you'll get paid commissary from people. You know, they'll reward you, just like, let's say someone works in the kitchen, right? Well, people want extra food from the kitchen, obviously, because, you know, the food in the feds was good, but you're still going to be hungry at night. And some of the stuff was really like in high demand. Like Cornette one time said, you know, they called me Bundy. That was everyone has a jail nickname too. And mine was like, because I tended to look like the serial killer. So it became a thing. I know like in society it sounds kind of cringy, but in there it's like normal because those are the kinds of people you're around. But he was like, Bundy, the way do you taste the brownies? And I thought he was kidding because, you know, I'm thinking jail food, you hear these bad things. Well, the feds, it's very good. So I take a bite. This thing is like the most rich brownie I ever had. I was full after one, and Cornette had this thing where he's buying them from the kitchen. So people that work back there are getting extra food to the inmates, and in exchange, the inmates are paying them stamps, which is like the main currency there, or commissary items, or having money put on their books through people on the street, like on the outside. So it was like if you had something, like the drug game was big in there, there's a lot of gang activity. They used drones to fly the stuff in. So they had to seal our windows at Otisville, right? Because though the drones were coming right up to the windows with cell phones, drugs, tobacco, all kinds of stuff. So what the inmates started doing after that, they started getting it in through either guards or they would do it at like legal and family visits. And sometimes even in the legal mail, to the point where they had to start copying the legal mail in a machine because they were putting that K2 stuff, which is like a synthetic form of marijuana. They were getting it sprayed onto the legal mail, and then inmates would cut it up in pieces and smoke it. Now that K2 was dangerous. I saw people freeze on that stuff and seize. Like, they'd be talking to you 1 minute. I had a cellmate that was doing it, and they would just freeze. Like, it was like freezing in place. Like, they're just suddenly gone. For about 20, 30 minutes it would last. It was the strangest thing. And I said, how would anybody want to do that? But then I said, I can't judge because you know what? It's hard. It's very difficult in there. And I said, I really, to be honest with you, can't judge people for wanting to do something that's taking them out of themselves in an environment like that, even though I myself, because see, like, I struggle with alcoholism. That's my thing. So, you know, obviously people made that in there. I stayed away from it because that's what really landed me there. But I just kind of came to that realization, like, you know, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. So my whole thing was basically like, who am I to judge somebody that's, you know, spending their time smoking that stuff, even though I thought it was pretty bad. But anyway, so Cornette, like, he was a close buddy of mine, and you know, some people had the drug hustle, you know, some people had the kitchen hustle, some people would clean for you, like clean your cell and get money that way. Some people cut hair, like basically whatever kind of skill you have that you could bring to people, it becomes like a supply and demand type of thing. And it's kind of like a free market in a way that gets, you know, kind of comes to fruition there because people are very innovative and smart, and inmates really, I've seen some really creative people over the years in there. So the medium was not the worst. I was in some really bad spots. I was in Dauphin County Prison because I've had a couple violations, right? And they've all been related to drinking, no new crimes. So the Dauphin County was the worst spot, and MDC Brooklyn was bad too. That's where P. Diddy's been at. That's where Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's wife, was. And I kid you not, when I walked in that place, you get on the 4th floor, right? And it's literally like the gangs come on right up to you, and they assign where you live. They assign the cells. Like, they are bringing you your medication. Like, they are bringing people and offering them drugs right when they come in. They have cell phones in there that it's crooked, the whole place. I mean, the medical people ask me what kind of drugs I do and what I want. And she said, don't tell anyone I'm doing something illegal. I said, this is insane. This is like the Wild West. I could not believe what I was seeing. There is deaths in there. There's stabbings. There's no medical care. I was having alcohol withdrawal, right? And I had to get on the floor in order to get their attention because my heart was racing. My blood pressure was through the roof. So the medical did come up, but they took me down and gave me like Ativan, which is what helps with that. And I kid you not, when I'm done, the medical says to me, if this ever happens again, just make sure it's before 6 o'clock because we leave. And I'm thinking, what if somebody has a medical emergency at night? So like you're just not there for them. Then they didn't have panic buttons in the cells, like, because you got to think these were people from New York, right? Like gang, Bloods, Crips, like from the city. So these were kind of a rough crowd. But again, if if you're very adaptable and you're good with people, right, you find a way to get through that. And sometimes you have to be firm and confrontational with people. You can't show weakness or any form of being intimidated, because I learned that very quickly. Because when you first get in, obviously everybody's freaking out. I was scared as hell. And I used to I used to cry at like my first few nights. And, like I think I showed that I was anxious, right? But the longer you go on, you learn that when you do that, you're showing a lot of weakness. And in an environment like that, you're not going to make it long without being preyed on in some way. So you have to be like firm with people. And that's why, like, even when it came to like lending people things, because that was a big thing too. Like, oh, I'll lend you this before commissary day, because you order food every week on the commissary. You get money from people on the outside. So people would always like run out of coffee early or soups and be like, okay, can you give me this? Like 2 shots of coffee, I'll give you 4 back. Well, I learned real quickly to be very careful who I lend stuff to, because it becomes a thing where you'll get taken advantage of, especially if you're a nicer guy like me. And not only that, but people then come to expect it. So like if you don't, like let's say you can't do it because you're running short yourself, people will get pissed then because you open that door and they don't want to close it. And that's something I learned quickly as well. Like you have to be very vigilant with who you associate with. Not only that, but if you associate with the wrong people, you can get in trouble that way by having like someone, do something in your cell, or even moving in with someone that's into the drug scene or some of the crazy stuff. Because if their cell gets shooken down, which would happen a lot, like searches and shakedowns where you have no right to privacy, you're strip searched, you got to go to the yard while they search your cell. And I remember like thinking, well, because I've seen that happen to people where it wasn't them doing it, it was their cellmate, but they go to the hole of the shoe, which is like the special housing unit. You're in, 23 hours a day locked in away from the general population, and nobody wants to go there. So again, it's just about being vigilant, and you have to like show them like you're not a pushover, you're not going to take it, because the moment that gets kind of established on the block that like this guy is weak or will take it, right, they will prey on you immediately, because everybody sees it as weakness, and you're in big trouble then, because it's very hard to like reverse that once that kind of starts. I've seen a lot of people get themselves in trouble like that. I saw a really bad, my buddy Alex Shevgert, and I say my buddy, he was a prison acquaintance, right? Not somebody probably. Now it was funny because he told me he's a Russian gang dude, right? He's like, I could kill somebody and then go to a movie with you, like my friend, aside from all because he considered it business. So he's like, I could kill someone and go to a movie with you after and feel like nothing happened. That was just how he was wired. And, like it was like, I've seen him before beat the shit out of somebody like bad because the dude wouldn't give him his radio back, and there was blood all over. That was probably the worst thing I've seen in there. I saw someone get stabbed. I saw there was blood all over the sidewalk when we were walking back from the chow hall one day. So I did see that. That was pretty rough too. He survived, but my buddy Alex, the one time somebody had broken like the tablet charger, because you have tablets that you can have. So someone broke the charger. He said, I find out who broke the charger, I will rip your balls off. And then he just comes walking out of the room like, hey, Bundy, like smiling at me like like nothing happened. It was the craziest thing, like how he just in an instant would go from that like, crazy, like, I'm going to kill you Russian gang mode to like completely normal. But no, he was somebody that I will say this, like he did look out for me. He told me he was going to bring me to Russia and introduce me to some prostitutes. He actually taught me, he said Russian prostitutes would like you, is what he told me, which I kind of found that funny. But he did teach me a lot about the culture in that region too, in like Russia and the former Soviet Union. I learned a lot about the history in those countries, which was very fascinating to know someone from there too, because you do meet a lot of very like knowledgeable people from all different backgrounds and walks of life, which is one thing that I like. Some of the people legitimately, even though not all of them were great people, I do miss. I think the worst thing was being around like child molesters, like people that do stuff to kids, because that's like an unforgivable offense. Like, you know, I think those are the types, I'm not a big death penalty guy, but I believe like in certain cases, right, like there's no changing that. That's just kind of like how they're born, and it's just kind of in them. So you could put them in for 30 years and they're going to come out and have the same urges and likely do it again. So I think those people should get that, because, or at least be in some way like made so they can't have the, you know, like the attraction, if you know what I'm saying, like have something kind of done. Because the thing is, like, that's something that it's not really a like jail / criminal issue as much as it is like something going on upstairs that's very, very wrong, like very, very sick thing. So that was hard being around people like that. But, you know, one thing I will say is whenever I was in MDC, I was definitely freaked out in there. Like, that was the scariest place I was ever at. And if you look, if you're ever curious, you type in MDC Brooklyn in Google or go to YouTube, there's videos like talking about openly how bad this place is. The judges in New York and SDNY got to the point where they were giving violent people bail instead of sending them to MDC for their pretrial detention, because it was so, like, you know, inhumane, the conditions. So that's how, like, everybody knows it's, the building's falling apart and it's crooked as hell and it's, you know, it's like a catastrophe, but they look at it like there's, you know, they got to put the inmates from New York somewhere, so they won't shut it down for that reason. Now, whenever I was at Dauphin County, that was a rough spot too, because they're the lock-ins, like the whole jail's like a 22-hour lock-in. And it was like, you know, you're so isolated from people, and then like, you know, the medical company that took over isn't giving people their meds on time. You know, people who had serious conditions were getting very sick. Like, that place was another one that, and it was more of like the, I think the isolation that was getting to my mental health, because, you know, I'm a very big people person. I like being around people. And when you're suddenly just locked in a cage like that all day, it's very unnatural. And, you know, you're quick to get very depressed. And, you know, that place has a lot of problems too with gang violence. And, you know, it was definitely a rough spot. But I want to say, like, what ended up happening with my case, so basically I had a couple of violations related to drinking, and they had a condition they put on me, and these were two, we challenged this on appeal. These were two conditions that were unconstitutional. One of them was a social media ban, but it didn't actually say that it was a social media ban. It was very cleverly worded. It was basically use of the internet is restricted to limited and necessary purposes. But here's what's crazy about this, right? It wasn't added in my original judgment from Southern District of New York. It was later added by the Middle District of Pennsylvania. And they snuck it in a way. When I left the first time to go to the halfway house, I signed agreeing to my conditions, because they had to transfer my venue here to Middle District of Pennsylvania, where I'm from. So they snuck it in without telling me, and I signed agreeing to this monitoring software on my cell phone, which is usually used for like people that have a terrorism background that get a conviction and get out years later, or people that have like a serious case involving children, is usually, because I look on the website and it said like Save the Children, dedicated to ending human trafficking, and I'm like, no, this is not, I don't want this. So it was just kind of like, I couldn't believe it when I went to see the PO and he reads the conditions with me. I said, that wasn't one of my conditions, but they added this in a very like clever, sneaky type of way. And that's a big part of what kept getting me caught up too, along with the drinking, because, see, here's the thing. When it's basically your social media is being banned, right? That's a big First Amendment issue right there. And the reason it was, because if a private company does it, that's not a First Amendment problem. A private company can do what they want. But when a government entity bans you from exercising any constitutional amendment, it is a constitutional violation. That's why we challenged that. Basically, like, I was being censored from expressing my political views. The same thing happened with the monitoring software, where it was like kind of a, what you would call chilling effect it had, because you're very like afraid almost with what you want to say, and like careful with what you say, because it's like you feel like there's constant eyes on you. So what happened with that was like they were monitoring very closely my activity on the internet. And what was strange was the conditions for it, for the software. One of them was like no porn, because normally, like I said, the conditions used on like serious sex offenders. So I said to the PO, I said, we didn't have a very good relationship, but I said, what's up with this condition? Because like you're saying no porn, but I don't have that kind of case. I'm 25 years old. Like most people that are that age at some point are going to watch porn. So I said to him, this doesn't make any sense, and it never really did. So we challenged it on appeal, because they kept bringing up stuff about like, I don't want you watching, because I watch Steve Bannon. I watch a lot of political podcasts, right? Like that's my passion. And I was watching his podcast, and the PO calls me and says, what are you doing watching Steve Bannon's war? I'm on a video right now. I'll talk to you later. Sorry, that was my mom. I'm over here. I got to spend a lot of time with my family, which is beautiful too. We've had a really good time this weekend. It's like a blessing to be around them and be fully free again. So, that's something that I've really don't want to take for granted, because you don't really realize how precious that is till you lose it. So, no, my mom's been great, and I've spent a lot of good time with them since I've been out. But so the PO was asking me about the Bannon podcast, like, what are you doing watching Steve Bannon? And I said, well, what do you mean? It's a political podcast. Like, that's my First Amendment right. And he says, well, no, it's not, because that's inciting extremism. And there's been a lot of extremism in this country since Trump's election. And I said, that's a matter of opinion. I said, like, to basically come in and tell someone you can't watch this content because I think it's extreme. Well, maybe I think what you're watching on the other side's extreme. That becomes like a very dangerous territory and a slippery slope. So they used that as a justification multiple times to put me back in prison. And what happened in 2020, I think it was the beginning of last year, right? I announced, because I filed a run for Congress here I was actually in the 11th Congressional District. I was at Lancaster at the time, right? I wanted to use my platform to do something good, like to help people. My experience, I believe anything bad can be turned into good, and I've always loved politics. So, I filed a run, not really believing that necessarily I would win, but just maybe like a lot of candidates use a platform to raise awareness about issues they believe in, kind of start a social discussion. That was the goal. But when I filed, I think the real reason that they did lock me up was retaliation for filing, because a tweet comes out from the congressman from the case attacking me. And they basically said that, like, my post where I announced I was running, I said, if I got elected to Congress, I would do a killer job. Well, I said in prison, they called me Bundy, which I said was my nickname. And if I were elected to Congress, I would do a killer job. Well, a killer job is a pun, or like a synonym, or a metaphor, I should say, for basically, I would do a great job is what it means. Like, anybody has heard that term, you did a killer job on that report, killer job in the play. Like, it's a very common phrase. So I was kind of stunned that they actually consider that to be a threat. They considered the remark, and that's where I felt like kind of unfair, because no matter what I did, it was like everything was being demonized and interpreted in like a way that like I'm a threat. And that hurt, because anyone that knows me knows that that's like the furthest thing from the truth. And yeah, I said some stupid things while intoxicated and should have been punished for that. I believe my original sentence was just, but that situation there, sending me back for 10 months, and it took me up until right after the midterm elections that sentence took me to, which I found very suspicious. Like, all of a sudden, or not the midterms, the presidential election in 2024, like all of a sudden my release date's November 21st of 2024, like 2 weeks after the election. Now it's like I'm good to go out. And that judge, Connor, that I had, he retired now, thank God. He was stuck in that like tough on crime 90s, just lock him up and throw away the key mentality. So I had guidelines of 4 to 10 months for that violation. He gave me 10 and said I was incorrigible, and basically, that I indirectly threatened the Congress. And it was just craziness, because there was nothing remotely in my ex statements to be threatening. So they were construing things really how they wanted and just kind of going with it. And it was just like, I just felt the most like low that I've ever felt then, because I just felt like I was being like persecuted in a way, and it was just unfair, and I was having like words put in my mouth, and that's not a good feeling to have. Like, it's intimidating to have the U.S. government doing it, but we challenged these conditions on the First and Fourth Amendment grounds, and the appeals court did rule against us because they ruled that people who are on supervised release or parole have a reduced privacy interest, which is partially true, but there's supposed to still be a standard of privacy instead of the standard of them needing probable cause, which is like to establish that you've committed a crime. They do have to have some reasonable suspicion. They can't just suspicionlessly search or monitor you. So what we didn't understand, and Fred Ulrich did my appeal. He was awesome here in the Middle District. His wife represented me in some of the future proceedings. But what I didn't understand was I had not the same privacy interest as someone that is a totally free person, like off of parole, but still, nonetheless, some expectation of privacy. You can't just suspicionlessly monitor me, which is what that condition was doing. So I think the Third Circuit Court of Appeals didn't really look at it closely enough and just kind of rubber stamped it. That's kind of my opinion with that. But we were kind of like stunned about that because you're upholding something that blatantly violates my constitutional rights, and that did not sit well with me. So 2 more times it happened where I got sent back for drinking and social media. And the thing is, I looked at it like, I have the right to express my views. Everybody does. This is America, right? So for me, I got on and I said about looking to get in contact with someone that could help with clemency, because I felt like at that point the case had become an injustice. We also had a man from New York named Joseph Morelli. You can look this up. And I'm in prison, right? And I see an article in Time magazine about this guy that called and threatened Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia Republican congresswoman, and they're interviewing him and telling his story of how he went down the rabbit hole and got caught up. And it was very similar to my story, but he got 3 months in the same judicial district in New York. He gets 3 months in prison. I get 20. And I understand the fraud charge was another thing that bumped mine up a little bit, right? But still, 20 months compared to 3, that's a huge sentencing disparity. And one of the things, if you study the law under the 3553 sentencing factors that federal judges are supposed to take into account, is to try to avoid unwarranted sentencing disparities between people with similar crimes, similar convictions, right? Because that creates a thing where it's like in 2-tier system of justice, people are being punished differently for the same thing. A lot of it becomes based on bias of some way. It doesn't just have to be political bias. You can have racial bias, you can have gender bias, all kind. You can just not like how someone's hair looks because I went bald because all this stress, and you can give them more time. That's the kind of thing they're supposed to avoid. So we were when I read that, I was stunned. I couldn't believe it that he got 3 months, and I was instantly just very distraught and just felt like I had been kind of screwed, because it felt like I did something wrong. But even my brother Ben would say, yeah, you did something wrong, but you should have never got that much time. Because you got to think, I spent years total when you add all this up in prison, and it was a long time. It took a huge toll on my mental health. So we tried our best with the appeal. And like I said, the whole thing with the sentencing disparity just didn't sit well with me either. There was a lot of things about the case as it went on that put a bad taste in my mouth. So I reached out to the DOJ. I got in contact with Ed Martin, the pardon attorney. I'm friends with him on Twitter, and we were messaging back and forth, and they were talking about having me come into D.C. for a meeting when Trump took over to actually discuss clemency. And it ended up going off the rails. It turned into, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of corruption in the government, and I think a lot of it was going to be about money, and my family doesn't have that kind of money. So I think based on some things that were said, and then with me filing to run against Scott Perry earlier this year, I think that played a role because his name was brought up, and it was basically said in not so many words, drop out and help him, get behind him. And they were kind of in a way trying to leverage the pardon, I think, on those conditions. So that put a bad taste in my mouth. And that's not, I don't blame President Trump for that so much as I blame the people around him, because, he needs to be more careful who he puts in that administration. Because when you have people like that are basically using the DOJ and the legal system to try to personally benefit, that creates, a serious problem. And people just, justice, people already lost so much faith in the justice system, which is, I believe, part of the reason that somebody like him is in office right now and won. But that's just making it even worse. It's eroding public confidence, period. So, we were going to do something about that to meet in the DOJ building in DC, but it fell through. And I had asked on Twitter for help getting in contact with someone when the administration was incoming that could help me with clemency. Well, they gave me 6 months for that, for using Twitter to ask for help with a pardon. They gave me 6 more months in jail. And it was just like, how is this? And I was in Dauphin County the whole time, which is the 22-hour lock-in. And you're just so isolated. Like, you feel so hopeless and distraught. You're cut off from the outside world. You're not getting any real news. And, you know, your mental health just deteriorates. And it's like, you get like kind of numb to it after a while. It really breaks you at first, but then you become numb and kind of like a shell kind of a person, because the whole jail is solitary, really. I mean, you're with one other person in a cell, and you got to shit in front of the person, use the bathroom. You don't have any privacy. Every moment that you have in there is with another man in the cell. And that takes a toll as well. It's not natural. A lot of it's inhumane. The food is disgusting in there compared to the feds. So, you know, they put me back in 6 months for using Twitter to ask for help with clemency, which was insane. But this last time in court, this was a drinking violation that I had, right? And I got into an argument with the PO, and I feel horrible about how I talked to him because, you know, it was rude, but I was just kind of at my wit's end with everything because this whole process had taken such a toll. And, you know, he's getting on me about the monitoring software again, installing it. Well, the installation didn't work because my phone is old. And it's an iPhone 8 still, believe it or not. I'm not really a tech person. I don't keep up with the times with technology. But I talked to the PO. We got in an argument because the software wasn't installing properly. And it ended up being that basically I was drinking. I relapsed. I think I do have a lot of PTSD and trauma that I deal with from the whole ordeal. So I think my drinking actually turned from like just at night to all day, every day. When I was going through this, it made it a lot worse. And there's some of the things I got to work through. But basically, he put out a warrant, right? And I thought I'm going back to prison for some time because that's the kind of the track record with this case. They kept sending me back over stuff. And I got a new judge on my case because Judge Connor, the one I mentioned before, retired. And Judge Neary, who was appointed by Joe Biden, took over here in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. So I go in front of her, right? And she heard the whole story because she had seen me last time for my last violation. So she read everything. I wrote an 8-page letter to her, as well as a letter for another inmate, my buddy Will, who I'm trying to get out as well, advocating for him because he's got a nonviolent drug charge. So we want to see him come home. So I wrote a letter to her about Will. And I was very complimentary to her because she treated me with such kindness and respect when I've been in front of her. I think that played a long way. My family, my grandmothers wrote letters to her too about the missed time and some of the health issues they're having. So she ended the proceeding early. She basically paused the proceeding and went back. She said, I got to contemplate all this. Like, you know, there's a lot to decide here. And I'm thinking, oh, she's going to send me back to prison for some time. At this point, the government was only asking for 4 more months, and my lawyer was only asking for 4 more months, and the guidelines are 4 to 10. Like, everybody had just kind of hit that point where it's like he's done enough time. So she comes back, and I'm thinking I'm going to get at least some prison time and more supervised release. I've been sitting in Dauphin County for about like 2.5 months at this point. So she comes back and she says, Mr. Hall, I'm very concerned about you. She says, was very upset to see you back here. She said, I've read this whole case from start to finish. You're not a threat to anybody. She said, you are very smart and intelligent. You have a lot of talent. And if you just pursue this political stuff in a healthy manner and pursue the things you're good at, you can be a very positive person and make a positive difference in society. With everything happening, I brought up to her about Charlie Kirk and some of the political violence happening in the country. I'd met him once at a rally. We had shaken his hand. He was registering young people to vote. I was with a young person who was a good friend of mine, just turned 18, and we met Charlie Kirk. So that hit me hard when that happened, and I mentioned that in the letter. And Judge Neary basically, she saw the good in me, and she was very empathetic and very compassionate lady. And I'll tell you, I said that it was amazing because it was vindicating to feel that. My lawyer said in 33 years of being a lawyer, a federal defense lawyer, that's only the second time that she saw a proceeding where the judge basically went back to her chambers and just, instead of giving the person any jail time or supervised release, she just cut my paperwork and said, you're free to go. You know, it was like I walked out of there Al Pacino style, like Carlito's Way, if you've seen it. That's kind of how it felt. It was real gangsta, but no, it felt good. It really did. My family was there. We were so happy. It was like the weight just got lifted off my shoulders. The nightmare's over, and I just am forever grateful to her because she, didn't have to do this for me. She's a Joe Biden appointed Democratic judge, and I'm a member of the Republican Party. And to be honest with you, she showed more empathy and and did more for me than my own political party. I mean, she had more testicular fortitude to do the right thing than they did. And I don't blame Trump because, again, he's very busy. He's not like he can look at these cases himself. He's got a team that are working on these clemency cases. So, I think if it got in his desk, frankly, he'd have signed it. I really believe that. But I think the people around him just was all about them. They had no testicular fortitude or balls, and you have to have balls sometimes to do the right thing and help people out that are going through something difficult, especially when you see an injustice and someone getting lost in the system that's really not a bad person or a threat, but they have an addiction, which is probably, to be honest with you, I'd say 85 to 90% of the people I was with, that's the case. Like, not a lot of people are the Russian mobster. And he knew he was a danger too. He straight up said, I know I'm not going home, I've accepted this. And he knows that he's, what he's done, he accepts it. And I respect that because he's not saying, a lot of people will deny culpability. He's straight up saying, like, yeah, I did it and I got to face the time for that. And he straight up admitted to me he's a stone cold killer in not so many words. So, it's just one of those things. I think the legal system has to look at cases on a more individual basis a lot because my family have been saying Josh is not a threat to anybody or a bad person. He said some stupid things, made some poor decisions, but, while drinking. But really the problem here is the alcohol and the mental health stuff, not a criminal thing, right? And Judge Neary saw that, and I got to thank her. How do you thank the person that gave you your freedom and your life back? I mean, she did an amazing thing, and I spent, instead of being in jail for one more night, they released me that day, right? And they just let you out the door with nothing. I mean, you got to have somewhere to go, which I'm blessed to have my family, and I'm going back to this halfway house in Harrisburg area. But, it was like I go from a jail cell, isolated 24 hours a day, going through all this hell and turmoil to all of a sudden I'm with my family at a CB football game for the first time in years, and and spending time with my niece and nephew, and it just felt amazing. It's a very hard thing, like you want to kiss the ground, man. It's a very indescribable feeling to describe when you lose your freedom and have it stolen from you and just suddenly get it back. It's amazing. I'm 26 now. When this all started, I was 22, and the drinking got bad when I was 21, but it took a turn for the worse when it took a new level when this federal stuff started. So, it's been 4 years of a nightmare, and I just want people to know what's happening in the prison system is inexcusable and unforgivable, and for what's supposed to be the greatest country in the world, which in a lot of ways I believe we are, we can do a lot better on that front. We have 2 million people incarcerated, more than any other country in the world. It's insane how many nonviolent drug offenders are stuck in prison. Not all of them are innocent. Obviously, most of them are guilty, and we can be fair about that. But at the same time, I believe in mercy and second chances, and most of them have been over-sentenced, I believe, that I've spent time with. And I want to advocate for those people, give them a voice from the outside and an opportunity to get back to their lives. And a lot of them have reality checks and wake-up calls because they were suffering from an addiction of some sort and just had to fund that habit, which I know all too well what that's like. It's like it physically takes you over. It's not something after a while you feel like is a choice. So I saw a lot of people like that in there, and I really had empathy for them. You also see people that come from bad backgrounds, right? Like no father in the home. Gangs were in their life from a very young age. And that's a hard thing to change because when that's all you're exposed to in your environment, you can see how someone goes down that path. And not all of them were bad people. Not all of them were sociopaths. There was actually legitimately good people that I met that had made those types of choices and were a part of that life. But you could see the good in them and the potential, but they're just stuck because and then in jail, in prison, you got to think that's all you're around, right? You're only around people like that. So, and there's no rehabilitation being pushed. A lot of these programs now, First Step Back takes time off, right? It has taken time off people's sentence. It took time off mine. But a lot of the programs that are being pushed are a big scam. Like the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, is a mess. it's rated always consistently the most incompetent, the most corrupt, and the worst federal agency there is. So, there's programs, but they're not doing anything for people. And I think with people being surrounded by that nonsense in there, and the drugs, and just the lack of anything productive, it's taking a toll. And if anything, it's making people come out worse than when they're going in a lot of ways. And you feel bad for people like that, because I don't know what that's like to come from a background like that. And, in some ways, what I didn't like about it was the racial stuff, because it's an intentional means of keeping people divided. And it's just so ignorant and uneducated, right? And I wanted to move in with a black guy once, and I put in a slip. We both did, because we got along well. Sometimes you get along better with the blacks than your own race. And even on the street, I lived with 2 black guys once. So it's all about the individual. I'm an individualist, right? I don't see people by their skin color. I've just always believed in the individual theory. So anyway, we put in a slip to move in together, because he had done my hair before, and he did a great job. And I was close with him. I was having issues with my cellmate, because I have gotten in some confrontations, believe it or not, with some people. And we put in a slip, and I said, why hasn't it been approved? When the counselor comes around, he says, well, I can't really say this because it's not, proper for me to say it, but it's because you're different races, and we don't do that here. I said, what do you mean you don't do that here? I said, this is 2025. We don't live like that anymore. Like, segregation's been out of this country for 60 years. They said, well, not in the prison system. It's not because safety reasons, And to a degree, like, with the gangs and stuff, I sort of get that, but it's like you would think if 2 people are making a decision to move in together, right, that would just be like accepted, like that's okay, like these guys get along. It's better for everyone to have cellmates that get along than people that are like, at each other's throats and could potentially create a physical safety issue for both of them. So I was kind of stunned by that one. The car thing is real. Like you're in a car when you're there. You have to join a certain group for safety and protection, and just to kind of guide you. People look out for you when you first get there. They'll give you things to help you get on your feet. And if you've never been to prison, people will show you how it's done in there, like how it works. And you have to, so I was in a group where we all sit together in the chow hall, and it's like, it was all white guys. I didn't really particularly care for that. Like I said, that the way it was set up, like with the racial stuff. But sometimes you got to put in work, it's called, for your car, which means if something happens, right, let's say you have a conflict with another car because someone from yours or the other one does something, like the Bloods or the Latin Kings, and it pisses off the other car. Well, then you have to defend the people of your car, and you also have to sometimes hold people of your own group accountable if they're going into drug debt, if they are disrespecting people, if they're going into gambling debt, or getting high where it's becoming a problem. You got to pull them in the cell, and sometimes they got roughed up. I've seen it, and that's why I stayed out of all that shit, because I didn't have to worry about that. But you have to hold people, because it's really a thing of the car is like what makes what makes the place like run, and they call where you move into. And a lot of that, the protection, it comes down to that. So when one person in it is doing things that are jeopardizing the whole group or making us all look bad, creating issues with others, it has to be addressed. And that was a big thing in there too. The biggest thing I'd say out of everything that I learned in there, a lot of it's just about respect, like just with anything in life, treating people respectfully. And you're not just going to have people come up to you, unless you're in like a federal penitentiary. You're not just going to have people come up to you looking to start violence or fight. That's very rare. So if you are kind of just staying out of the way, which is unnatural for me, because you could probably tell I'm a very outgoing person. I love people. But in there, I had to be careful because you're in prison. So I had to stay a little bit more out of the way and to myself. But if you're just keeping to yourself and you're not bothering other people, and you treat people with respect and courtesy, right, generally speaking, you're not going to have problems. And I didn't for that reason. Not only that, but I'm a bigger guy. So I think, when people see you from a distance, right, they're a little bit more leery about going up to somebody and messing with them that's a little bit bigger built. And I think that played a role as well, because you got to think, right? I had to be someone I wasn't in there. Everybody kind of to a degree does. You can't be too, I was still myself to a degree when I'd be in the cell with people talking to them, or whenever I would be like watching a movie with people, or whenever I would be watching sports. We watch a lot of sports in there, like football's huge. You know, I had lighthearted moments where, and I miss some of the people, I genuinely do, but you can't be fully yourself. You have to put on a little bit of a, like a hardened look and a hardened attitude, because the people do smell weakness. And I'll tell you, that was hard for me, was because I'm a very like soft, emotional type of person. So, you know, I made it because I had to adapt in order to survive and get through it. But it's going to take a lot of time to work through, and you know, dealing with all that. I've had some issues with like bad dreams already, and waking up in a sweat, and some of it I think has followed me, like the impact it's had. But I just want people to know, like, the prison system, not everybody in there's a bad person. Anything can happen to anybody. You go down a bad path in life, and you know, the people get in there for things they didn't even do sometimes. It's rare, but it does happen. So just have, you know, try to have a little bit of like, give a little bit of pause when just, you know, wanting to condemn people and throw away the key, and put yourself in people's shoes to try to understand a little bit, even if they did something wrong and need to be punished, right? Try to understand in some ways the circumstances that led to that. I think that I've gotten a little bit more liberal in the criminal justice stuff going through it. I think the current president's been through a lot legally himself, and helped pass the First Step Act in 2018, which I saw send a lot of people home, and I heard a lot of the difference that made in people's lives firsthand. A lot of people were thankful to Trump for that. So he's definitely not a traditional Republican on those types of issues. He wants to give people second chances, and he's pardoned a lot of people. He wants to see people go home. And I think that, you know, society is leaning a little bit more in that direction. Certain crimes, like I said, like murder, rape, doing things to kids, right? You can't let those people back out. They're unredeemable. There's no bouncing back from that. But when you have a nonviolent drug thing, when you have a alcohol or drug addiction that's driving the criminal behavior, that's something that can be fixed, and it needs to start being looked at on a mass scale in that way, if we're going, because these people are going to come back in society someday anyway, right? If it's not a life sentence. So we should want, even socioeconomically, to train people in there to be able to do well when they do get out, to be productive, contributing citizens who don't go back. Because the prison industry, it does become a business. They do make a killing off of you. It's a monopoly, because you can only buy the commissary from them. You can only use the phone minutes through their phone company. So that's basically the definition of a monopoly. You don't have another choice. They're profiting off inmates and their families, which I believe becomes an incentive to keep the jails populated. It's lining their pockets, the people that run the industry. So, and there's a lot of quiet people that quietly have investments in that too. If you do a little bit of research, it's pretty amazing when you start looking into all of it, what you find. But yeah, it's you would think, right, that you would want people that are eventually going to be coming back into society to not be mentally in turmoil when they come back, and to have that opportunity to be good, productive citizens, and, you know, give them a chance, man. I mean, it doesn't make really any sense to me to have people so messed up that they're having to go on Social Security disability, which if you spend 7 years in prison now, you're automatically eligible. I spent 3. You know, I did, that's a substantial amount of time. That's most of my 20s, more of my 20s than not at this point. So it's something that put a lot of things in perspective for me about life. I'm kind of thankful I went through it in a sense now, not when I was going through it. Obviously, you don't think like that, but you have a lot of time to reflect on yourself as a person. It's very philosophical. You get closer to God. If you don't, I think there's something wrong with you, because that's the only thing you have in there to lean your faith in. Everything is out of your control that happens in there, and you are being held captive, basically. So you just have to lean on a higher power and pray to God that it'll be okay. And I felt a lot of peace doing that. He definitely showed himself to me in there, but it's a life-changing experience. I don't wish it on anybody, my worst enemy, but it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But it can be used. I think everything happens for a reason. Sometimes you need people to give voices to things like this, and it really can be used for something really good. I believe that with all my heart. It doesn't have to be something that like keeps me down and, like keeps me in that hole forever. Like it can be something that in the long run is empowering. And I already think I'm starting to find that kind of purpose through it. So I'm really grateful I got to make this video and that I'm free at last and off of supervision after all this time. I just want people to know, you know, put yourself in people's shoes. Try to put yourself in other people's shoes, because you never know what's going on. And, I'm glad I got to expose some of what's happening. There's going to be much more from me, I think, as time goes on, because I have a lot to talk about with this story. But I'm glad that I could finally get my side of the story and what really happened out there now that the censorship is no longer on me, and I feel free and empowered to do that. It's a blessing. So yeah, just to be free with my family, something you often take for granted. Now I go out in public now, I don't mind waiting a couple hours in a restaurant. I'll be the most patient guy ever, because I had to wait 3 years, to have to get this life of mine back. And I'll forever be thankful, profoundly and everlastingly grateful to Judge Neary for what she did for my family and I. It was an act of compassion, grace, and mercy. And she certainly didn't have to do it. It didn't do her any benefits. She was a Democratic appointed judge, and I'm a Republican. So the mercy she showed upon me is something that gave me a lot more faith in the system, and showed me that not everybody in the government's evil, and not all of them are politically motivated or political actors. It's going to take judges like her that really do change the system from the inside. She's 43 years old. She's young. And we need some of the newer generation, younger blood that understands these issues more, is more in tune with them, and is openly talking about societal problems rather than trying to just lock people away and pretend it doesn't exist. We need people like that on the bench and in government that are going to make a difference. So thank you to Judge Neary from the bottom of my heart for giving me that opportunity and that freedom back. Truly amazing, amazing woman. But thank you guys for watching this. I look forward to, talking more with you about this story and experience as time goes on. And I just want to say God bless you guys. I love you very much. Thank you to everybody that stuck by me, especially my family and my many great friends out there. And I hope everybody out there is doing well. It's almost holiday season, so we have a lot to look forward to still this year. I'm looking forward to spending that with my niece and nephew. All right, guys, I'm a big talker, so we're going to wrap this one up. Take care. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.